Hi, this is Heidi. We just finished our first meeting of the One Country Project and have incredible news about how well we've been doing and everything that we've been talking about. And with me is the rest of our board of directors, absent Joe Donnelly, who always seems to be a little absent, right? Yeah, well, he's probably still back in Indiana doing what he needs to do to get the Fighting Irish across the finish line on whatever sport he's looking at. But we wanted to, just kind of do a recap on where we think we are. And a lot of us are getting questions about what do we do and why are we doing it and how in the end will it make a difference. And we're going to start out with you, JD, because JD actually is in the mix. The rest of us just kind of serve, but you are actually in this cycle running for, the Iowa 4th?
Yep, Iowa's 4th Congressional District. Yep. 4
congressional districts, and this is a repeat performance for you. What changes do you see in rural attitudes this time as compared to 2 years ago?
Well, I think you see, especially in our district, which is the second most agriculture producing district in America, we see a lot of just frustration. We don't know where the markets are. We don't know a lot of things. And what we see is this administration says one thing and then does another. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. And especially since August 9th, when the last refinery waivers for ethanol
can you explain that? Because a lot of people, everybody's looking at the China trade war as kind of the pivotal economic event. But for those of us who live in rural America, where corn has been king, it's these waivers that have a much more dramatic effect.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately right now, it's the oil industry versus the farmers, and the oil industry is winning out. And so I view it as, if Coke controlled Pepsi, how well would Pepsi do? And and what we're seeing, small refinery waivers are meant for the smaller refineries who would find it economic hardship to blend 15 billion or part of the 15 billion gallons of ethanol that's mandated to be in our transportational fuels. And what we've seen out of this administration is just handing those things out like candy on Halloween. And as a result, our farmers are leaving way more grain in the bin. It's depressed our corn prices by up to 40 cents a bushel. And we've had 2 plants go idle and 2 plants close in my district alone, ethanol plants. And this is it doesn't make the news as much, but this is where we're seeing Trump supporters actually turning their back in where I'm from.
So you're more optimistic that people will be more open-minded, willing to at least consider voting for a Democrat because of the economic conditions in agriculture.
100%. But we also, as Democrats, have to give them a reason to vote for us.
Absolutely.
And so we just can't assume they're going to vote for us. And so that's one of the big things. Being in Iowa during the caucus season, I'm really pushing a lot of these 2020 candidates, saying there's a huge opportunity here. Let's take advantage of it.
We're going to turn to Anthony Daniels, who is the fabulous and amazing emerging leader in this great state of Alabama, and has been serving as the minority leader in the House of Representatives, but also just an incredible thought leader on what the new rural America looks like in the South. And I think that one of the things that we tried to do, because we're pretty comfortable talking North Dakota, Iowa, but, I don't know a lot about rice. I don't know a lot about cotton. I don't know a lot about, in fact, we pick on your peanut farmers because we think you guys always get some advantage because you Southern guys hang together when we're doing the Farm Bill. But one of the things that I think is really misunderstood is this idea that states like Georgia and Alabama, Mississippi and Louisiana, that there is no opportunity for Democrats to advance or at least present a new idea that's going to catch fire. Now, those used to be solid before civil rights. These used to be solid Democrat territory. We're proud of what turned them Republican. We just need to turn them back Democrat. And so tell us about your work. Tell us how you think it's different than what you just heard JD talk about and what we can do to not just build one country urban rural, but one country rural, Great Plains to southern rural.
Well, thank you, Heidi. I think for me, one of the things to put it in perspective, before 2010, Alabama Democrats had 3 constitutional offices as well as supermajority in both the House and the Senate. And so it wasn't that long ago.
Nobody really would know that if you didn't
it wasn't
just say
that
it.
long ago. But I think where we are today is a combination of really not building infrastructure in the South. One, the Republicans knew that if they went after the unions, the teachers' union, and other organizations that have been traditional Democratic strongholds or supporters in providing infrastructure outside of the Democratic Party, that they would be able to destroy the Democratic Party. And so they were very successful at doing that. And what has happened is Democrats have not, in Alabama, we've not bounced back from that. And so right now we're on our way back, and we're trying to be smarter and make certain that when we come back this time that it's sustainable long term, not just something that's just instant. And so I think one of the things that we have to do and continue to do is have conversations with our friends in rural America. One of the things that we have to realize is that rural America is very diverse. And rural America, I would put up against any urban area or suburban area in this country. And so I think what we have to turn the conversations toward is opportunity and innovation. We know that our farmers are being hit really hard in Alabama. Alabama exports in agriculture is about $2 billion. And right now, we're not even at $1 billion, and so it's
50% decrease in
more than 50%.
And you think, just so people understand, that's new wealth creation for the state of Alabama. So when you're not getting $1 billion, that means there's $1 billion less in that economy that's going to buy pickup trucks and going to go to the movie theater and go to restaurants. I mean, it has a huge impact, kind of multiplying down through the economy.
It's forced a lot of our farmers, especially our mid to large farmers, to start filing bankruptcy, and they're regardless of the subsidies that's provided from the federal government, I don't see them being able to recover from the hits that they've taken. And so, right now, what's going on in Alabama, not just agriculture, but also the tariffs and the impact that they're having on our automobile industry. We have Hyundai, Mercedes, and a number of other car manufacturers, Toyota, Mazda, in Alabama. And so that's impacting our economy and job opportunities and growth in the state of Alabama. And so our community, our folks are starting to feel it. And so you're starting to hear folks kind of mumble under their breath about pushing back on the policies of this president and this administration. And so those are things we just have to make certain that we're the party of solutions and talk about what we're for and how we're going to get there, so that we give them reason to go on our side. They would rather be non-affiliated politically than to be a Democrat in many instances because of the national brand. Yeah. But in Alabama, I consider myself as being an Alabama Democrat. And when you brand an Alabama Democrat, you still have to define it. And so that's what Senator Jones is doing right now is showing that he can work across the aisle and that he's about Alabama, not party politics is fine, but being able to represent the state. When you're a representative or a senator and once you're elected, your job is to really represent the interests of the entire state. Mm-hmm. And that's what he's doing in Alabama, and we're very fortunate to have someone like him and others, and that's why it's so beautiful to be a part of one country.
He's such a principled leader, and I mean, I just have incredible hope for Alabama knowing you and Doug, and I know that you guys are listening to the people that you serve, and that's going to make all the difference. It's going to make the difference because I think that it's pretty easy for the Republicans to take people for granted and say, well, they're always going to be with me. That's not a problem. I'm just going to continue to promote economic policies that decimate their livelihood. That's only going to go so long, right?
Well, they're already seeing the pushback as a result of the 13 hospitals that have closed in the state of Alabama. And these communities, when those hospitals are closing and they're the largest employer for about 40, 50 miles or more. And so, that kills the town. and the employment opportunities for and the hope for those individuals that are in those communities. The community colleges can't produce enough nurses and other folks to be able to retain those communities, because what opportunities do they have when their hospitals are closing in record numbers? And so we're one of the few states that decided not to expand Medicaid, and we're seeing the financial impact on that is killing us.
Think about all the money you left on the table. Medicaid was a 90-10 at worst match. And so 90% of that healthcare cost, we took it in North Dakota. Guess what? You're subsidizing my Medicaid expansion, and you're not getting healthcare. I mean, I think it's malpractice for any governor, any legislature not to expand Medicaid. It's just nuts.
I agree. We've left behind them more than 300,000 people that would have access to it.
And how much money for your healthcare system?
Oh my God, it's about a $1.5 billion
think about that.
impact.
Yeah, we're the same. We haven't expanded
either.
And
we're going to turn and talk to Ashton about her willingness to join us, although we're going to do a separate interview with you on that. But I want to just kind of bring this full circle, and I want to acknowledge it's great to have another woman.
Woohoo! Always a good thing.
One Country Project. And, Ashton, tell us a little bit about yourself, and tell us a little bit about why you think this is such an important discussion to have, addressing the concerns of rural America through the One Project.
Yes, so I'm Ashton Clemmons, a state representative from North Carolina. And
where in North Carolina?
Greensboro, Guilford County. And this is my first term in the legislature, and have spent my life very passionate about our traditional public schools, and was a teacher, school principal, and a district assistant superintendent before I ran for office.
So I want you to give JD the eye that principals give every kid who comes in.
Yes, exactly.
I've seen that look before.
Yes, it's a popular
look.
Yeah, it comes in handy. Actually, a lot from being a school principal translates to the legislature.
Herding cats, getting people to play well with others.
Exactly. So I'm deeply passionate about our public schools, and have spent my life in our schools where we weren't really doing what we needed to do for kids, and was able to serve as a principal of a turnaround school where we were the lowest school in North Carolina, and School of the Year, my third year, we made dramatic growth. And so that really is my true love. And in North Carolina, we similarly had a major shift in 2010. We had Democratic leadership for most of the history before that. And we have really our Republican legislature, in my opinion, is full out assault in our public schools. And so that's how I ended up running and being in the legislature. But then am specifically excited to be here in North Carolina. Like many states, we have great urban centers and a great history of agriculture and farming. And our state is great because we have both of those. And unfortunately, too often we have a conversation where one is pitted against the other. And that's why I'm excited about the work that's happening here in One Country, because really our state is about lifting all of those boats. And until we are singling out the issues to rural people in our state and across our country, we're not going to address them in the ways that we know we need to. So I'm excited to be part of this.
Well, I mean, I think that when you look at kind of the progress that we've been able to make, and, those of us who came together, and you guys signed on pretty early, and Ashton, you're just coming in now. But when Joe and Donnelly and I sat down and kind of envisioned this, it was born out of our experience, which is that the Democratic Party has left rural America behind. And you still hear it. You still hear in the dialogue that, well, we don't really need to worry about those people. We're just going to speak to our base. And if we get high base turnout, we're not going to lose. We're going to win. And it was interesting because in your recent special election in North Carolina, again, when you look at those numbers, it's, they turned out record numbers in the suburbs and the urban area, but yet still failed to get the majority because they didn't do better, in fact, did worse in rural America, in that rural county. And so, our desire is to not just win elections, but to unite this country and quit looking for divisions. And so I'm curious, as you watched that congressional race, what advice would you give to anyone who's in that spot with maybe a plus 12 Republican district that needs to address rural concerns in a state like North Carolina? What would you tell them to focus on?
I think that rural voters are working hard to make sure that their families are taken care of. And they want politicians, candidates who are going to their communities and hearing what that means for them and putting their needs and interests forward ahead of any standard answer that either Democrat or Republican Party is going to talk about. And so I think many of our congressional districts in North Carolina, we have 11, there's an urban part, but they also have rural voters. And we're not going to win those until we are certainly turning out votes in our urban centers, but also turning out votes in all of the rural parts of those districts.
Didn't you recently have a redistricting challenge?
Well, yes.
So
our state.
So tell us about that.
Well, our state legislative maps had to be redrawn this year. They were determined unconstitutionally partisan gerrymandered. They had already been racially gerrymandered unconstitutionally, so they've already been redrawn once. So we had a new set of redraws. That happened in September, and the plaintiffs filed a challenge to not accept the new maps. We voted unanimously against them. The Democrats did in the House. We feel like it still continues with the problems of our past. But in the meantime, because the precedent has now been set against our state constitution, the congressional maps have been challenged to that same Superior Court panel that just made our legislative state maps. And so we're waiting to see. We're supposed to have filing in December, which is the earliest we've ever had it, and the court order, when they originally made the decision, they retained the right to change primary dates, to change filing dates, because that's been a constant excuse. We don't have time before the primary or filing. And so they said, we'll change those if we have to. So it will be an interesting time in North Carolina. Hopefully, at both the state legislative level and at the U.S. congressional level, we will have more fair districts. I think that's what's right.
Anyone who doesn't think this matters, I introduce you to the state of Pennsylvania. And the state courts have been much more protective of voting rights of people by saying you cannot gerrymander these districts. Every vote should count equally. And JD, obviously, Ashton's in a state that's probably going to gain congressional seats. Everybody forgets how big North Carolina is. Mm-hmm. Mike Easley, who I don't know if you know Mike, he's a dear friend of mine. We were AGs together. He used to remind me about how big North Carolina
and
was.
Growing.
Yes, I know.
We hope we're going to have another congressional seat after our
I've been
census.
Indoctrinated. That's my point. I know how big you are. But 11 congressional seats, that's huge. Mm-hmm. But you have 4 in Iowa and hope that you hang on to them, right?
Yeah, I think we're fairly safe this time. But we've gone, growing up, when I was first growing up, we had 7, and now we're down to 4.
You think about that. And so I think when you look at the opportunity that we have to make inroads and to actually have a conversation with rural voters, you can't do that unless you have a conversation. And I think your point, Ashton, is so well taken, which is, what do rural voters expect? They expect people to show up and listen, and then not just show up empty-handed, show up with good ideas, show up with some challenges, and just kind of gradually represent the kind of value but also logical, common sense leadership that people in rural America have come to expect. One of the questions I have, and it's probably a little more loaded, which is, growing up in a state like North Dakota and in a community of 90 people, the person no one wanted at their supper table was the guy who bragged, the guy who lied, the guy who talked about how much money he gave someone but didn't really give anybody anything, the guy who, maybe cheated his neighbor a little bit and didn't pay his bills. You just didn't like that guy. That guy was, you maybe have been nice to him at church because that's what you do. You all go to church together. But he's not your best friend, and he certainly was never the mayor of your town. Why is it that we have a president who consistently doesn't tell the truth? He cheats people. I mean, here he's continuing the trend that he had for not paying his bills now by not paying the cities their security fees when he does these rallies. It's just completely consistent. He bullies people. He brags about stuff that he doesn't do. I mean, you wouldn't even tolerate that in your next door neighbor, but yet we're so willing. And in rural America, where you think those hardcore, values voters are, that they're so willing to tolerate it.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, we have a New York billionaire.
Yeah.
There's so many
I dispute
head
that he's a
scratching.
billionaire.
Yeah, is he a billionaire?
Yeah.
Fair enough, but it's one of those things.
We have a New York land developer.
Right, exactly. And I scratch my head on, I understand why a lot of folks wanted something different where I'm from, but and that's why, I don't know, I see a lot of folks where I'm from are looking elsewhere. And so that's why I'm so excited about what we're trying to do and being that voice of saying, hey.
My brother has an expression. He always says, well, would you throw him the keys to the car in the bar fight?
I love
right?
it.
And, is he somebody you could trust would hang around and not leave you behind? And the answer probably is no.
No.
You wouldn't throw him the keys to your
he sells
car.
the car.
So I want to, before we wrap it up, I want to talk a little bit, because you're all in states that will likely have very competitive, very expensive Senate races. Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. But I just, Anthony, having gotten to know you, I have so much hope and faith that the South will reflect more collaborative, middle-class values, that there won't be this, huge disparity, that the Democratic Party can come back. And I think there's so many people who would say, well, Doug Jones can't make it. There's no way he can make it happen. What do you tell folks in this town, Washington, D.C., when they kind of write Doug off?
Well, I would tell them that in Alabama in the last cycle, and so let's go back to 2014. In 2014, in the governor's race, there were about 400 and something thousand Democrats that voted. And fast forward to 2017, for Doug Jones, there was approximately 600 and something thousand Democrats voted. In 2018, without all of the organizations parked in Alabama on the ground, there's about 700 and some thousand Democrats that voted, folks that voted Democrat. And so then you have, when you break it down by race, you have about 400 and something thousand African Americans voted, with about 400,000 that did not vote. And so I think one of the things that we have to look at is the difference in a U.S. Senate, in a presidential race, or any statewide office in Alabama is getting the folks that are already on our side, turning them out to vote. Oftentimes we like to run right-of-center campaigns, but history tells us that that's not necessarily working. You may peel off a small percentage of folks on the other side, but if you're not getting your folks out, you're leaving something on the table. And so I would say that there are 400 and something thousand people that we're leaving on the table, that we're not organizing. And that 400,000 makes the difference in a U.S. Senate race.
Now I want to ask you this, because there's 400,000, and you're myopically focused. We've talked about this before on those 400,000. Why aren't they voting?
Because traditionally we've developed platforms that in a general election, we develop platforms that appeal to right of center. Uh-huh. And so you stop talking to the folks that got you to the dance or that can get you to the dance. And so what we have to do is start talking about issues that they traditionally care about, like prison reform and education and opportunity. I think that we've allowed ourselves to focus on the big and shiny, the issues that are coming out of New York or California that may be a priority for those folks, but not a priority for the folks in Alabama.
I don't mean to pick on your state, but no, seriously, I don't mean to pick on your state, but look at poverty levels. Look at childhood poverty levels. Look at how you pay your teachers. Look at all of the kind of measurements that we believe are significant in terms of measuring a healthy state and a healthy economy. I mean, you're not there. in Alabama.
We're not, but I will tell you that our infrastructure is not there either.
Yeah.
And so we have the worst gerrymandered districts in the United States. We're the first to make to challenge. We ended up coming back through the legislature and still got it wrong again. And so, when people are picking their constituents instead of their constituents picking their elected officials, there's always going to be a problem. And so that's what's happening in Alabama. That's why we have the sixth worst infant mortality rate in the country. That's why we have a horrible maternal mortality rate. That's why we're last in education. That's why we're among 46 in healthcare. But I see a demographics moving into the state of Alabama in places like the Huntsville area, Madison County, where we're focusing on high-tech jobs, and so we're recruiting folks from out of state. And so that's changed our demographics, voting demographics in Alabama from 36% Democrat to about 48 in the last election. And so we're aggressively moving in the right direction. It's just that our engagement, the voter engagement piece is where we're missing in the messaging. And we don't have the infrastructure to do it.
I think if you go out and talk to people, so what do you want your state to look like? What do you think would be a measurement of success for your state? And the things and after years of Republican leadership in your state, it's not getting better, right? So it needs to get better and it needs to improve. And it seems to me that you're the kind of leader that can make that happen. But we also know that many of those voters that you need to have that conversation with do not live in your major cities. They live in rural communities across Alabama.
Well, I think right now in those communities are not growing. The places where we're the most progressive, those areas are growing. And so I see a demographic shift here within the next 8 years that'll put Alabama in a place to where it can.
Yeah, it's kind of like when people look at Kansas and they say, what happened in Kansas? You want to say suburban Kansas City happened in Kansas. It's gotten more urban. People kind of think about Kansas, and Kansas has always elected moderates to the Senate. And that's even true today. I mean, both Jerry Brand and Pat Roberts aren't the most, Tea Party conservative, but I think Kansas is like your state, where you see these urban areas grow. Des Moines. I did once say I traveled to Des Moines to do a thing. During a campaign season, I said no one would ever accuse me of going on a junket to Des Moines. but I got there, and it's a hopping,
It's
vibrant, booming, kind of modern city.
Yeah, we got
so
tech in there.
How have the demographics shifted? Obviously not for your district, but
right. But that's in the 3rd district, and Sydney Axtee won that last cycle, and she only won Polk County. And that's a huge thing that I've worked with her on a couple things on how to expand on that and different things. And I think what we're doing in Iowa is a microcosm of what's happening in America, and it's about that Obama coalition. And the part that I feel doesn't get talked about enough, or the things that we're all passionate about, is the rural areas and competing in those. And that means in those areas that it's 80% Republican, that might mean we get 25%. And that's what we did. We shrunk the margins in every county last cycle. We moved the needle. Trump won my district by 27, and we lost by 3. And and we know there's so much more room to grow too. My high school, when I was there, we were 4% minority. Now we're 24% Latinx community, and so we got to find people where they're at, and that means every community, and there's just so much potential. And so what I'm really telling folks are, look at, if we want a pathway to the Senate, if we want a pathway to statewide races in the next midterm, it's going through the 4th district and organizing this district, because for years it was abandoned, both by the state and in the national party. And so when we abandon these things, it allows people like Congressman King to be elected consistently.
So all of you, as I said, are in challenging Senate races. Your state is in a challenging Senate race. Ashton, when you look at North Carolina, and like you said, Kay was a dear friend of mine, is a dear friend of mine, and did a marvelous job, but just got taken out in that really tough year 6 years ago. How do you see your candidate basically being able to come back, and what advice would you give him on addressing concerns of your district and rural North Carolina?
Yep. So North Carolina, it's funny that JD said Iowa is a microcosm, because I think North Carolina is a microcosm, and probably you may say Alabama is, because that's what we're passionate about. But, North Carolina is a total purple state. In 2016, we voted for Donald Trump by 6 points, but we also elected a Democratic governor, a Democratic attorney general, a Democratic secretary of state. And so...
And that was in 16.
Yeah, in 16, exactly. And so I think that shows that many of the voters in North Carolina are up for grabs in our U.S. Senate race in 2020. And they will, if they feel inspired or they feel like you really are going to solve their problems and hear them out and focus on the issues, then they'll vote for you, no matter which party you're in. And we see that in 2016, they felt that way about Donald Trump, and they felt that way about Roy Cooper, who's our governor, who are on two different sides of the party. So I think that that's exciting as an opportunity, because it shows that our Senate candidate, as long as they stay focused on solving problems, I don't think that, especially the voters we need, the voters who are going to vacillate between Obama and Trump, or vote for, we've done focus groups on people who were Trump and Cooper voters.
Yeah.
And those voters do not want to hear the talking points from either party. They want to hear people who know and care about their issues and are going to solve them, and not people that are going to be just lobbing bombs across the aisle at each other on either party. And I do think that hopefully will show some reflection about what happened with our presidential vote in 2016. But I think that would be my recommendation for people running in our state, is to focus on the issues, let the talking points go, let the bomb throwing go, and focus on what the people of North Carolina need to continue to move our state forward.
Well, I want to transition just really quickly to an issue, a lot of discussion when I ran in 18. We ended up, and it's ironic because I told my staff, we'll do okay as long as there isn't a Supreme Court vacancy. Mm-hmm. Guess what? Justice Kennedy announced his retirement, and that opened up a late election season debate, which turned into a lot of I think controversy, and I think Joe Donnelly would say this, and Claire would say it, not helpful to those of us who were in cycle. So I think about what are those those surprises that come at the end, or what can we anticipate? And I'm curious, because we're going through the impeachment inquiry, and I think it's really important that people not say we're going through impeachment. There's been no articles of impeachment filed, but there's a lot of dialogue and discussion about whether that impeachment has a political effect. Now, I'm gonna not let you dodge this question, because I'm gonna take off the table whether it's a constitutional imperative that there be an inquiry. I believe there's a constitutional imperative. I think that we have enough evidence to suggest, and enough of a serious breach of security for this country, and serious questionable activity as it relates to the Constitution, to have that conversation. But how does impeachment play politically in rural America is a question a lot of people are going to be asking. I'm just curious about your state, and we're going to start with you, Anthony. How do you see impeachment playing in your state, the impeachment inquiry, and what advice would you give to Nancy Pelosi on making sure that this doesn't, given the fact it's a constitutional imperative, but to manage it in a way that does not lead to political consequences?
Well, I think the messaging has to be on target. I think that, oftentimes we throw about 10 to 13 reasons against the wall instead of focusing on one or two and make those stick. And so if we go into this talking about all the different things that the president has done that's illegal, I think we lose the argument at the end of the day. I think that what we have to do is zero in on one or two and just stay the course, but make certain that those one or two are actually impactful to the voters. It's among the higher things in their mind of if someone does this, I can never forgive them. And so we got to focus on the unforgivable pieces and stay away from all of the talking heads or the noise. And so I would ask them to really approach this and being in defining that message and have evidence, and not something that just appeals to the base, but something that appeals to the conscience of those individuals that are left, that are out there that may be, whether they're churchgoers, folks you see at church, or they in the legal community. I think among those individuals are probably the most that are tuned in to something when you talk about corruption, because they're looking to make certain that is it something that I believe is morally wrong, right? Or for attorneys, it's more the ethics, the extremes of ethics, and then there's no gray area. If you go into the gray area and you cannot prove it, then I think it backfires on us, and it hurts some of the folks that are, especially in the southern states, it hurts them more than it hurts anyone.
Because it looks like you're picking on them as opposed to holding them constitutionally accountable. There's a whole lot of so what. When you tell people he did this, this, and that, well, so what? They all do it. It all happens. But, I think that when we're talking about the national security of our country, it's pretty important that we recognize that this is a serious time. And I think the speaker has approached it with a kind of sadness. I think she's used that word that it warrants. And I think she's been driven to this by his actions. I think she was more than willing to say, let the investigations find out, about obstruction of justice under the Mueller report, which people never really understood, what he did that was wrong there. And so it builds this kind of case that he's been the victim. And, I think that I always find it interesting when they say, well, he's the victim. And I want to say, so you wouldn't let your kid play that game, right? You'd say, what do you do wrong? What was legitimate? What wasn't legitimate? And, it never seems like we get to that point where we're having a conversation about what's legitimate bad behavior.
I think, like I said, we focus on the issues that we feel that are the things I described. But I think that what we have to paint a picture for America about is that we've tried to replace an old friend with a new friend, and it didn't work. It's time for us to never replace an old friend with a new friend and replacing this president, because we wanted something new, and we wanted something that we felt was outside of the political hemisphere. And we got it, and we got burned. And so now it's time to go back to the table, and this time when we cast our vote, we have to focus on an old friend that was there for us instead of a new friend that screwed us.
So, JD, you must be getting this question in your district, right?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where it's very partisan, and the fallback is I feel people they go to that.
They go to what?
They go to, that's just partisan politics type of thing. And so I think that's one area where we really need to define it. I think one way to talking about it is to any Democrat who just blindly is for impeachment just because they don't like Trump, that's wrong. I think we need to be honest about that. But on the other side, any Republican who just blindly says he's fine, he did nothing wrong, that's wrong too. And so it's one of those things where we're going to have to see where I like that we're having these witnesses come in. I think that visual, I just remember being on a flight and having the person in front of me have CNN on, and just that during one of the hearings, and just that visual is more, I think it appeals to the senses than it just people talking about it. And I think that's how the case is going to be made.
I think, one of the examples that I gave, and people said, well, it wasn't, a promise for something else. And I had to laugh. I said, so if I came in and I said, Mom, I need $50 to go shopping, and she said, I need your room cleaned. Pretty much, if you want your $50, you better clean your room, right? And so there's I think this is easier to understand.
I think so too.
The question is that I think people, if he had tried to extract a promise that was, in fact, related to national security, which is, I need you to talk to Putin or to, be engaged with Syria, or, I need you to stand with us on a resolution condemning China. Mm-hmm. You'd go, oh, well, that's the kind of bargaining that goes on at that level. But I need you to help me dig up dirt on my political opponent is not in the security interest of this country.
Right. And so much on the campaign trail right now, I talk about valuing, we talk about fix, fight, and secure, fix healthcare, fight for an economy for everybody, and secure our democracy. But it's also, we got to value healthcare. We got to value our workers and our workforce. And the last part, we got to value our Constitution.
And our democracy.
And our democracy. And I think this is a huge part of that. And the more we're digging up, I just, like what Anthony was saying, we need to have that focus because it can be all over the map, and we can really lose some of the narrative.
Yeah. Ashton, anything you want to add to this conversation before we wrap it up?
The only thing I'll add is I think kind of where JD ended, and we have seen some of our congresswomen and men go back to their districts and answer for their decision to do this, and that would be my recommendation, that Nancy Pelosi and everyone in the House go back to the people you represent and explain where you're coming from. Do not shy away from having difficult conversations, because the people that you represent deserve to know why you support this, what you hope is going to come out of it, and ultimately, I think the decision was made based on our responsibility to represent our country. And as long as we can keep putting that reason back in front
country
of the
first.
voters, that we don't enjoy this, we don't want to do this, but we feel like our country demands it, and that's why we're doing it. I think as long as we keep that in front of the voters, we're doing what we need to.
Well, I want to close with a story because it goes to exactly what you said. Joe Manchin comes from in fact, the second, if not the most pro-Trump state in the union. In 2013, we came into office right after the Sandy Hook massacre and killing. And Joe worked with Senator Toomey, and he did Manchin-Toomey expanded background checks. Okay. So understand that North Dakota and West Virginia, there isn't much difference in how we feel about the Second Amendment. But Joe did it. And he did it because he was principled, and I can argue about whether it's the right policy, but he definitely stuck his neck out. Guess what he did the minute he got done with that? He went out and did town halls all over West Virginia. And he stood when people were yelling at him and accusing him of being a traitor to the Second Amendment. And he explained, and he talked about the parents that he met. And he explained his decision. And political leadership in this country has forgotten that piece of it, that you don't always have to go with the public opinion poll of your people, but you have to explain why you're not. And I think many of us, and I would include me in that category, take shortcuts. And I think that's one thing that rural America doesn't like, is a political shortcut. And so I think we're going to continue this conversation. We could have a whole conversation about the rural economy, and we probably will do that. But we continue to believe that the Democratic Party, to be a party that represents the entire country, and a party that can govern this country, needs to not leave rural America behind. And that really is our focus. You guys just make me so optimistic. They're all way younger than I am. They make me so optimistic about the future of rural representation in our country and democratic leadership in rural America in our country. Thank you so much for joining me.